Go inside the Crimson Tide with your hosts Rodney Orr and Gary Harris, keeping you informed on everything Alabama. Tider Insider TV, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of Tider Insider TV, brought to you, as mentioned, by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports. Don Staley and his crew, man, they do so much great work for West Alabama. Alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com, I'm WVUA 23 Sports Director Gary Harris. And, you know, Bill Belichick, who's good friends, of course, with Nick Saban, has a well-known expression that it's about winning, of course, and it's about stops, not stats. That phrase fits well in Alabama's 31-29 victory over Florida this past weekend at the Swamp. The Crimson Tide in this top 11 matchup, Alabama number 1, Florida number 11. The Tide jumped out 21-3 after one quarter, Rodney, and maybe it came a little too easy. And give Florida a lot of credit. They did not quit. They kept playing, and they kept with their game plan, which was to run the football and pound Alabama, mix in some play-action pass. And Emory Jones did have the one interception by Jalen Armour-Davis, which led to an Alabama touchdown. But all in all, he played well, and Florida came back in the game. But let's not forget about Alabama's quarterback, Bryce Young, 22 of 35 for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, no interceptions. He's got no picks and 10 touchdowns on the season. And he had some balls flat-out dropped, too. His stats could have been even better. Brian Robinson worked hard as a running back and receiver with 85 total yards, more than 70 yards rushing, and a couple of touchdowns, one rushing and one receiving. Jace McClellan continues to be versatile, catching a touchdown pass out of the backfield, and Jaleel Billingsley caught his first touchdown of 2021. On the defensive side, Will Anderson Jr. was a man. 3.5 tackles for loss, 7 total tackles. He's the SEC Defensive Player of the Week. As we mentioned, Jalen Armour-Davis got his first interception of the 2021 season, and more importantly, Alabama got a stop at the end of the game on a 2-point conversion. That's what I'm talking about. It's about stops, not necessarily stats. Alabama wins the game 31-29. So, Rodney, it wasn't always pretty. In fact, after the first quarter, you could argue that Florida outplayed Alabama. But like I said on my radio show, the first quarter counts too. And if you're going to give Alabama a hard time for the last 3 quarters, you have to give them a lot of credit for going into that hostile environment. And let's be clear, it was very hostile. First-time fans back at the Florida Field in 2 years at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in the Swamp. And getting out to a 21-3 lead is impressive.
Yeah, again, I think the thing is, Gary, this team has played in lulls a couple of games. We saw it in the Miami game. They jumped out to the big lead. You know, similar situation. Obviously, Miami did not cut into the deficit that much. But at the same time, very impressive to be able to go on the road. I thought the way the offense played, for the most part, was outstanding, especially early on. And, you know, this game was really a whisker with getting away from Florida. I mean, the defense, I thought, played really well for the most part in the first half until late in that half. And then also, obviously, in the second half, things kind of got away. But, again, I think, obviously, you look at this team, they've got a lot of growing to do. I think potentially, offensively, this could be a really, really good team as we move along. Defensively, listen, I know a lot of people are disgusted with the way things went in this game, but don't forget last year against Ole Miss, similar point in the season, Ole Miss went for, nearly 600-plus yards on Alabama, scored 48 points, had 2 backs go for 120-plus. So you saw how that defense kind of progressed as the season went along. By the end of the year, they only gave up 19 points a game, won a national championship. So just give this defense a little bit of time. Let's see how they develop.
More on the offense, and this is a good offense, clearly. I mean, they're scoring points. It's not like they're not talented, but there is a but. I mean, the last 2 years, you've had 4 first-round draft picks, all of them going to be stars in the NFL. Judy, Ruggs, Smith, and Waddle. You had Najee Harris, who's a first-round draft pick at running back. We know how difficult that is these days. There aren't many first-round draft picks at running back anymore. You had a first-round left tackle in Alex Leatherwood. 6 first-rounders total this last season, 4 the year before that, most of those players on offense. These are good receivers. John Mechie's a quality receiver. Jamison Williams has shown out. Slade Bolden is solid. But they're not what we've had here at Alabama the last couple of years. And again, that's not a knock on them, but those 4 wide receivers, you might not ever see that again on one football team in the Southeastern Conference. So Bryce Young is working with good players, potentially great players, but not the same players that Mac worked with last year, or that Tua worked with, or that Jalen worked with. Okay, Jalen had Calvin Ridley, remember. Yeah. This is a different type of offense.
Yeah. It is. And again, the experience, we talked about that heading into the season, that there's a lot of development that needed to be done. And, you know, I do. I think this wide receiver core, when you look at John Mechie, I think Jamison Williams played really well. Obviously, I think JoJo Earle's going to become a bigger part of this offense as we move along. And look, seeing Jaleel Billingsley back out there in a key part of the game, makes a big touchdown reception early on. When you start seeing these weapons developing, and also Cameron Latu, we've seen him, and the backs really catching the ball well out of the backfield. Jace McClellan made a couple of really big-time plays early in the game, catching the ball. Brian Robinson made a tremendous play for a touchdown where he made a guy miss. There you see Billingsley hauling that in. So I think when you look at it as a whole, Gary, this offense, again, as we move along, as the offensive line continues to develop, they develop confidence, I still think this can be a really, really good, potent offense.
All right, before we wrap up the Florida game, the defense, there is a lot to concern you. They gave up a 99-yard drive. It's only the second time that's happened to Nick Saban at Alabama. They gave up 4 rushing touchdowns, only the second time that's happened under Nick Saban at Alabama. Florida rushed for 245 yards. At times, they pushed Alabama around on the line of scrimmage. You see it. And this is a team that is limited throwing the ball now. Their ability to control the line of scrimmage, I think, is concerning for this defensive front and linebackers going forward because they got pushed around some.
Yeah, and you know, Gary, again, after late in the first half is when it really happened. And you wonder about the adjustments and things that happened. You know, talking to people that know line play, that played line, defensive and offensive line in the SEC, they talked about Alabama's defensive front getting in the wrong gaps. Obviously not in terms of maybe some confusion, whatever it might have been, but that these are things that you can really clean up because people say, well, has Alabama not recruited very well up front defensively? Well, this is basically the same defensive front that won the national championship last year.
All right, let's hear from Will Anderson, who is the SEC Defensive Player of the Week, so he played terrific. He said what everybody's been saying, that they just haven't been able to defensively put 60 minutes together in a game.
I feel like defensively, we haven't played for 60 minutes yet. We haven't played to the Alabama standard, and that's something that we're trying to build on each week, especially coming off this week. You know, this was a real eye-opener that we need to get our stuff together for real, and we need to live up to the Alabama standard, and we need to play to the Alabama standard, and we need to go out there and execute, and all 11 of us need to be on the same page.
All right, easier said than done, but I'm like you. I think this Alabama defense can get it. Another concerning aspect is we're talking about some negatives from that game. Biggest positive is Alabama won the game. It deserves a lot of credit for that. But 11 penalties for 75 yards, and we've seen this in every game so far. We've seen way too many penalties for a Nick Saban coach team that prides itself on discipline. And some of them are really bad penalties now. 4th and 6 pass interferences, illegal procedures left and right that stall drives. This is not a physical mistake. These are more mental mistakes, I think, than physical mistakes. Yeah,
and again, sometimes those things develop and it just becomes a trend. But I think this team certainly, when you look at it, I think you obviously continue to work on that, emphasize that in practice. Those are some things. And you mentioned it, discipline, Gary, but it also goes back to, again, a lot of inexperience, too, on that offensive side. A lot of new parts, a lot of new pieces. And you talk about the pass interference. I mean, you can hardly guard a guy now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I did think in that case, I thought that Job interfered.
Job did on that 4th down, certainly. Yeah.
All right, it's time for Coach Talk, Rodney. One problem Alabama had on Saturday that we have talked about and Coach Saban has been talking about is playing 4 quarters, focusing and having intensity for the entire game. Here's what Coach Saban had to say following Saturday's game down in Gainesville.
But I think the big thing to learn from our players is, we continue to have to be able to maintain intensity throughout a game. When we got ahead 21-3, I think our players, we played, absolutely great football. And then we go 3 plays and out 3 times in a row on offense. Eventually they score a touchdown, get the crowd back into the game. And then it was difficult after that.
Still to come on Tider Insider TV, we preview Alabama's upcoming game against the Southern Mississippi Golden Eagles. This is not the Southern Mississippi team that you grew up with. They've got some issues there in Hattiesburg. And some former Crimson Tide stars starring in the NFL. It happens every Sunday. We'll take you around Bama in the NFL. And we'll get to your phone calls, emails, and tweets. As always, the phone number right there on your screen, 205-348-WVUA. That's 348-9882. You can email us at that address, TITV@WVUA23.com, or tweet at us using the hashtag TITV. We'll be right back with a show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, the one, the only Tider Insider TV. And welcome back to Tider Insider Television, brought to you by Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports. Alongside Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. Well, Alabama gets through Florida, they're 3-0. And again, before we move on to Southern Miss completely, I do want to remind people that Alabama won the game. And I say that because on my radio show, quite frankly, the last couple of days, Rodney, it's felt like a loss. And I understand it was 21-3. I understand people want to blow everybody out. But Florida's got 85 scholarships. Florida's got facilities. Florida's got a highly paid coaching staff. Florida recruits top college football players. So I just want to remind folks that, like Saban said last week, respect winning. Don't take it for granted. You should be happy, I think, to get out of there with a win instead of worried about what went wrong. When you lose one, that's when you really need to worry. So Alabama won the game. Just keep that in mind. And there was a time around here not that long ago that if you'd have beaten Florida under any circumstances, there had been a celebration. All right, Southern Miss comes in here this Saturday evening, and we'll have our game predictions at the end of the show. Now, Southern Miss is a great tradition, great history. Jim Carmody, Jeff Bauer, Rodney helped me, the coach that left to go to Southern Miss, Bobby Collins. What's SMU, yeah. And they used to do a lot with a little, and they used to, quite frankly, take a big chunk out of people. I remember not long ago, 2000, they beat Alabama 21-0. So they've got a good tradition there. But this team this year, Will Hall, first-year head coach, dynamic, I think is going to recruit well over time. But they're struggling with talent, and they're struggling right now with financial issues. They're 1-2. They did beat Grambling out of the SWAC, but they lost to South Alabama and to Troy. And they'll come in here as a major underdog. Plus, their quarterback, Trey Lowe, who is the grandson of the great Woodrow Lowe, former Alabama All-American and NFL linebacker, is out with a foot injury. So I say all that to say this. They're going to come in here, they're going to play hard, and they're going to be well coached, but there's a huge talent gap between Alabama and Southern Miss.
Yeah, there is. And, you know, you remember those quarterback runs we saw last Saturday? Well, you're going to see more of them with Ty Keys.
Yeah, the backup quarterback. And I also should mention Curly Hallman. It was 1990 when Brett Favre came in here and beat Alabama at Legion Field. Again, they're not the most talented team. They've got losses to two in-state teams already in South Alabama and Troy, and now they're playing the best in the state of Alabama. But one thing they do have is tenacity. That's built into playing football at Southern Miss. They've always played with a chip on their shoulder. So they will come in here and compete. We know that. But it should be a good matchup for Alabama to get some things worked out, hopefully play a lot of young players, and then kind of get ready for Ole Miss the next week.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, Gary, it's an opportunity to kind of get back in that rhythm. Because I think, for the most part, the defense had played well in those first two games, obviously, and I think it's a great opportunity to kind of get back to that. And you mentioned playing more players. I think that's going to be really important down the stretch. Alabama play more players on the defensive side. You build experience. You know, you preserve guys. I think it's a great opportunity to do that.
Alabama is a 45-point favorite in the game. Saturday night, 6:30. It can be found on the SEC network for the television, of course, on the Crimson Tide Sports Network with Eli and John Parker Wilson and those folks on radio. All right, Rod, the recruiting update, because five-star quarterback Denver Harris from Galena Park, North Shore in Texas is expected to announce his top two on Wednesday. His favorites include Texas and Texas A&M, but Alabama and LSU maybe will be those other two. This is a guy that Alabama has pursued. You know how hard it is to find quality quarterbacks. Any information on this young man?
Yeah, I actually spoke to a great Texas source earlier today, one of my best, and talked about Denver Harris quite a bit. Of course, we've talked about him here on TITV previously, but five-star cornerback, as you mentioned. Alabama has signed two players from Galena Park, North Shore in the last couple of years, a couple of offensive linemen, Damian George, Jaden Roberts. And, you know, my feedback, Gary, from Texas today is he's expected to drop his top two tomorrow, Alabama, LSU. And look, LSU's pushing really hard for this guy. Obviously, he's high on Alabama's board as well, but so we'll see what happens.
One to watch, that's for sure. Well, one of my favorite segments each week on the sports on WVUA 23 is Bama in the NFL. Everywhere you look. This is Derrick Henry. Yeah, he didn't have a good game in the opener against the Cardinals. He didn't have a good first half. In the second half, Rod, this is what he can do. He just wears on you. And then all of a sudden, look how big look at that little defensive back. Can't catch him.
Reminds me of that Arkansas run his freshman year.
Yeah, I mean,
down the sideline.
he wound up going for 182 yards on 35 carries, 3 touchdowns, 6 catches for 55. They're finally getting him involved in the passing game. They came back to beat the Seahawks. That's Mac Jones handing off because he was efficient. Mac went 22 of 30 for 186 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Look at Damian Harris. This is a 26-yard run riding for the highlight reel. And there's Mac helping push him in the end zone as the Patriots beat the Jets. Damian Harris got his first touchdown of his career against the Raiders, and also had a stiff arm that was very Derrick Henry-like. I'm going to show that on the Sports Tonight at 10. And here's Henry Ruggs on the other end of a bomb from David Carr. He had a big game. 5 passes for 113 yards, including that 61-yarder as the Raiders beat the Steelers. Also, Tua suffered bruised ribs, but the good news is he might be back against the Raiders this weekend. It looked pretty rough, but he might be okay. All right, still to come on TI TV, your phone calls. We're going to have them for us next. And there's the phone number again, 205-348-9882. We'll be back after this. All right, Tider Insider TV back here on WVOA 23, and we've been talking so much football, we're getting pushed for time, so let's go ahead and go to our phone calls. John is first up in Cordova. Hey, John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I was wondering, what do you think we need to do to improve on defense to get better? And what do you think about our defensive coach, and how do you think he's doing? All
right, John, good questions. You know, I think they're going to use this last game to really work on some corrections. To be quite honest with you, John, they played pretty well defensively in the first 2 games. I mean, I know they're playing Miami and Mercer, but they played pretty well. This was really the first game where you look at it and you say, man, the defense got exposed. So give them an opportunity to break down this game video, which they will do, and make some corrections. I think that they will. Obviously, that's their jobs. As far as Pete Golding, I know he's been a lightning rod for criticism. He's the defensive coordinator. He was hired by Nick Saban. I know this sounds like the old standard answer, but I trust Nick Saban's judgment when it comes to defense. And if he believes Pete Golding is good enough to lead his defense, then I do too.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. I go back to what I said earlier. You said 2 games. I think they played well in the first half for the most part in this game. But listen, as far as Pete Golding's concerned, here's the thing. This is 1 game. There's a long season. There's still several games to play. Let's see how the defense develops. I mean, you know, kind of rush into judgment here. All
right, let's get to an email here that we have to talk about. Do we have an email? Yes, we do. From Hemi in Tuscaloosa. Where's Demoy Kennedy and how's his progression going? Well, Hemi, he's a freshman, straight out of high school. I think his progression is going fine. It's just sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of a learning curve here, but I think he's got a chance to be an outstanding football player. Deontay Lawson as well.
He's a great athlete, fabulous athlete, same high school as C.J. Mosley out of Theodore. And I think, you know, again, you look at him, he probably needs to get a little bigger physically, but a tremendous athlete. He's on special teams. He's played some special teams. So, yeah, certainly keep an eye on Demoy Kennedy.
Absolutely. And Quandarius Robinson is back from suspension. They got a lot of young, talented athletes on that defense to watch for in the future. All right, we'll be back with more TI TV right after this on WVOA 23. Alabama soccer got back to 500 on Sunday with a victory over Utah Valley, 3-0. Tide dominated. They're now 5-5 on the season. They get back in SEC action when they host Missouri on Thursday. Maybe this will be the start of something good for Bama soccer. All right, welcome back into TI TV with Rodney Orr. I'm Gary Harris. Right back to the phone lines we go. Jason is with us from up in Brilliant. Hey, Jason.
Yeah, up here in Brilliant, we got a GoFundMe page to get Jeremy Pruitt back as a coordinator. And did y'all show the play where Bryce Young could actually step in backwards to score the touchdown?
Yeah, we don't have it queued up.
Above it?
Yeah, we don't have it queued up, but we'll talk about it, Jason. You want us to talk about defense on Golding and the play with Bryce Young? Okay. All right, listen, on Bryce Young, yeah, he could have dove into the end zone there. But he also is a guy who's looking to make a play with his eyes, throw the ball. If that ball doesn't get tipped, it's a touchdown to Cameron Latou. And I think probably he has been coached not to run unless it's a last resort. You know, they don't want to get him hurt, and he's not the biggest guy. So I'm going to cover for Bryce Young a little bit on that one. I think he saw it too. And as far as Pete Golding, again, I mean, Nick Saban's the head football coach. They gave up 29 points. It didn't like they gave up 45 or 50, as we've seen some teams around the country do. Let's see what adjustments they make, and let's see how they play the next 2 weeks against Southern Miss and Ole Miss.
It's like I said earlier, Gary. Last year they were in a similar situation, gave up over 600 at Ole Miss. I mean, people were distraught over the defense. That was probably, from start to finish, a sloppier performance than this one we saw on Saturday. Because if you remember, I think Ole Miss on the first play hit a big play to their tight end.
Did.
And again, so let's see how they rebound from that game. They certainly did it last year, and I think potentially they'll do it again this year.
All right, Jason, thanks for the phone call. We're going to come back and have our predictions for the Alabama-Southern Miss game right after this. Thanks for the phone calls and emails. It's our final segment, which means it's prediction time. Alabama is a 45-point favorite against Southern Miss on Saturday night.
Yeah, you got me to thinking, Gary. Back 1981, Reggie Collier tied Alabama 13-13, 82. He beat them here at Bryant-Denny Stadium, snapping Alabama's home winning streak. Brett Favre, 1990. You mentioned the game in 2000, but it ain't going to happen. 45-6, Alabama.
Yeah, this is a mismatch. There's no doubt about it. As I said, Southern Miss has fallen on some hard times. I've worked in that state in broadcast business. It's been a long time, but I've still got contacts over there, and they're struggling. I do like Will Hall as a head coach. I think he understands and gets it in how Southern Miss has been successful in the past. They find guys, quite frankly, that a lot of other people overlook. Projects, maybe that's a kid that's in high school, 6'5" and 225, but the coach says, hey, 3 or 4 years, he can be 6'5" and 280. He's very athletic. That's kind of how they've made their living. I think they'll get back to that in recruiting. But Trey Lowe, the quarterback, is out. They struggle. Frank Gore Jr. is a solid running back. Yes, that's Frank Gore Jr., the son of Frank Gore, the legendary Miami running back and NFL running back, but not nearly enough here. And I think Alabama's defense has heard what's been said. I think Alabama's going to shut out Southern Miss. I think they're going to win this thing handily. As we look at my prediction, it is a blowout the way I've got it called. Can we take a look at it? Do we mind pulling it up on the screen? Do we have it? Okay. Well, I got Alabama winning the game in shutout fashion over Southern Mississippi in a rout. I can't remember exactly how I picked it. That's why I was asking for it. There we got it. I've got it picked 48-0 on Saturday night over the Southern Mississippi Golden Eagles. All right, we'll find out on Saturday what happens between Alabama and Southern Miss, and then next week we'll recap that game and look ahead to the Ole Miss Rebels. That's going to do it for TITV. For Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. Thanks for watching. A reminder that tonight you can catch a replay of the show at 10:30 or find it anytime at WVUA23.com. It's also linked to TiderInsider.com. Have a great night, everybody. Roll Tide.